Gala host pointed at black guest. Remove him. Then his name appeared as tonight's honored donor. Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside. The voice carried across the marble foyer like a crack of ice on a winter lake. Precise, public, designed to land. Devlin Marsh stood at the center of the Hartwell Grand's entrance hall in a tuxedo that cost more than some people's monthly rent. His silver cufflinks, catching the light from 3 separate chandeliers. His expression arranged into the specific shape that powerful men use when they want to appear reasonable while doing something unreasonable. He was pointing, not gesturing, pointing. One finger extended across 12 feet of imported Italian tile, aimed at a man who had done nothing except arrive. The man he was pointing at was Marcus Webb. Marcus stood near the coat check, a single glass of sparkling water in his hand, still wearing his overcoat. He hadn't even been inside for 4 minutes. He had not spoken to anyone. He had not bumped into anyone, or crowded anyone, or looked at anyone sideways. He was simply standing in the foyer of the Hartwell Grand Hotel on the night of the Crescent Foundation annual gala, existing quietly in a space where Devlin Marsh had decided he did not belong. I don't know how you got past the door, Devlin continued, loud enough for the cluster of guests near the champagne table to hear, but this is a private event, ticketed, vetted, and you are not on any list that I am aware of. Marcus looked at him. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He simply looked, the way a man looks when he is deciding how much of himself to spend on a moment that doesn't deserve it. I'll give you a minute to gather yourself, Devlin said, before I have security escort you out. And right then, the event coordinator, a young woman named Priya, who had been standing 4 feet away the entire time, clipboard in hand, color draining from her face, looked down at her seating chart, then back up and went completely still, because she had just found the name she was looking for. Marcus Webb, tonight's honored donor, lead gift, 8 figures. Nah, hold on. He didn't even let the man get his coat checked. He pointed at him in front of everyone like he was calling security on a stranger at a bus stop. And this is the gala, with the crystal and the chandeliers. Brother, we are going to need to sit down for this one. Let's get into it. Marcus Ellington Webb was born in the 9th Ward of New Orleans on a Tuesday morning in October, during a rainstorm that flooded the street in front of the house and kept his grandmother from getting to the hospital in time. He was delivered by his mother, Celestine, and his grandmother, Ida May, in the back bedroom of a shotgun house on Desire Street, the same bedroom where Ida May had been born, and where Ida May's mother before her had slept on a cotton mattress and listened to the city breathe. Ida May Webb was a woman of 71 years, who carried herself like someone who had never been given permission to be tired and had decided simply not to ask. She worked as a seamstress out of the front room of that house. She sewed curtains for hotels, alterations for a bridal shop on Magazine Street, hemlines and buttons, and new zippers for anyone who needed them. Her fingers moving through fabric, the way water moves through grass, without thinking about it, without slowing down. She kept a jar of hard candy on the windowsill for the neighborhood children. She kept a photograph on the mantelpiece of a man in a postal service uniform who had died before Marcus was old enough to remember him. That was Ellington Webb, Marcus's grandfather, who had worked the same route in the 7th Ward for 22 years, and who had, according to Ida May, never once complained about anything except the humidity in August and the lack of a decent cup of coffee after noon. Marcus grew up in that house. He slept in a room where the window didn't seal properly and winter came in around the edges, and he learned to sleep in layers. He ate red beans on Mondays because Ida May said that was what you did. He walked to school in shoes that lasted 1 year longer than they should have, because Ida May resoled them herself, stitching the sole back on with the same thread she used for bridal hems. What Marcus also did from the time he was 9 years old was build things. Not model kits, not Legos, real things. He pulled apart a broken transistor radio that a neighbor had left on the curb and spent 3 evenings figuring out why it had stopped working, and 2 more evenings making it work again. He rewired the lamp in Ida May's sewing room when the switch shorted out, reading a library book about electrical circuits by the light of the kitchen bulb. He converted a broken bicycle into something functional, using parts from 2 other broken bicycles that nobody wanted. His 7th grade science teacher, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Fontaine, kept Marcus after school one afternoon and said, "Son, There is a word for what you do with broken things, and that word is engineering. Marcus had never heard anyone use that word in connection with him before. He began to think about it constantly. He graduated from public high school with a 3.9 GPA and won a partial scholarship to a state university in Baton Rouge. He supplemented it with 2 jobs, one at a copy center on weekdays and one pouring concrete on weekends, and he graduated with a degree in electrical engineering 4.5 years later, having taken 1 semester off to come home when Ida Mae had a hip replacement and needed someone to run the house. He went to work for a mid-size infrastructure firm in Houston. He was good at his job. Quietly, persistently, methodically good. He saved carefully. He studied the parts of the business that weren't in his job description. The contracts, the client relationships, the project financing, the margins. 7 years after joining the firm, he left it and started his own company with a former colleague, a woman named Rachel Torres, out of a rented office in the 5th Ward with 2 employees, 1 used truck, and a contract to retrofit 3 public school buildings in the Houston Independent School District. That was WebTours Infrastructure Solutions. That was 16 years ago. Today, WebTours had 430 employees across 6 states. They had completed work on bridges, transit systems, water treatment facilities, school retrofits, and community energy grid projects in 11 cities. Their most recent contract, awarded 6 months ago, was a federal infrastructure resilience project valued at $240 million. Marcus owned 51% of the company. He had never taken a salary above the median of his engineering staff until year 10, when Rachel had finally made him feel guilty about it. 3 months ago, the Crescent Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to STEM education access in low-income communities across the Gulf South, had approached Marcus about the possibility of a lead gift for their new capital campaign. The campaign's goal was to build 3 permanent learning centers in New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Houston, equipped with fabrication labs, engineering mentorship programs, and full scholarship pipelines to partner universities. Marcus had grown up 4 blocks from where the New Orleans Center would be built. He had agreed to donate $12 million. The gala tonight was the campaign launch. His name was on the program. His name was on the wall display in the ballroom. His name was, in fact, at the top of every document Priya had been holding since 7 o'clock that evening. He had arrived alone, without an assistant, without a publicist, without anyone to announce him. He had taken a cab from his hotel because parking in the quarter was a nightmare. He had arrived in a perfectly fine tuxedo, not flashy, not a statement, just correct. And he had walked through the front door of the Hartwell Grand and moved toward the coat check like a man who simply intended to attend an event. And that was when Devlin Marsh had pointed at him and told him to leave. Devlin Marsh was the chairman of the Hartwell Grand's hospitality board and the self-appointed master of ceremonies for every high-prestige event the hotel hosted. He had been in this role for 11 years. He was not a bad man in any simple, legible way. He was the kind of man who had moved through a specific set of institutions, prep school, a mid-tier New England university, a family connection to commercial real estate, and had absorbed, without ever examining it, the assumption that certain spaces were his to manage, and that the management of those spaces included making judgments about who fit and who didn't. He had made those judgments before. He had never faced a consequence for any of them, which is the specific kind of education that produces a specific kind of confidence. He had looked at Marcus Webb and made a judgment in under 3 seconds. He had not looked at the program. He had not asked Priya. He had not spoken to the foundation's event director, a man named Gerald Hughes, who was standing 30 feet away near the ballroom entrance. He had simply pointed and spoken, and now he was waiting for Marcus to do what he expected Marcus to do. Marcus did not do what Devlin expected. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his phone to pull up a confirmation email. He stood with his glass of sparkling water, and he looked at Devlin Marsh with an expression that was not angry, exactly, and not amused, exactly, but was something in between. The face of a man who has lived long enough to know that this specific kind of moment requires more patience than it deserves, I think, Marcus said quietly. There may be some confusion. There's no confusion, Devlin said. This event is invitation only. I need you to walk back toward the exit, or I'm going to have to involve the hotel staff. Priya opened her mouth. Devlin did not look at her. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Mr. Marsh. Voices came from behind Devlin. It was calm, professional, and it carried the specific weight of someone who was about to say something that could not be unsaid. Gerald Hughes, the Crescent Foundation's executive director, had walked across the foyer. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with a gray beard and reading glasses perched on his head, and he was holding the printed evening program in his hand with the same careful neutrality that a judge holds a document before reading it aloud. "Mr. Marsh," Gerald said again, "I need to introduce you to someone." Devlin turned. "This is Marcus Webb," Gerald said. "He is the lead donor of the Crescent Foundation's Build the Future campaign. He has given $12 million to build learning centers for children in the communities where he grew up. His name is on the cover of that program you've been handing to guests all evening." The foyer was quiet. Not completely quiet. There was still the sound of the string quartet warming up somewhere in the ballroom, and the distant clatter of a catering cart. But the dozen or so people within earshot had stopped their conversations. Devlin's face went through several stages. The first was confusion. The second was a recalculation happening visibly behind his eyes. The third was something that wasn't quite shame, and wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite embarrassment, but was some unpleasant combination of all three that he had never had to feel in this particular room before. He started. "Mr. Webb," Gerald said, turning to Marcus, "I am so deeply sorry. Please let me take your coat. The ballroom is ready, and there are a number of people who have been looking forward to meeting you." Marcus handed his coat to the coat check attendant. He set his empty water glass on a passing tray. He straightened his jacket. He did not say anything to Devlin Marsh. Yo. He didn't even look at him. He just straightened his jacket and walked in. That is a whole different level of composure. But before we get to what happened next, because what happened next was significant, let's understand what Marcus was actually walking into, and exactly how far back this whole story goes. The Crescent Foundation had been founded 14 years earlier by a woman named Dr. Lorraine Thureau, a former public school principal from the Treme neighborhood of New Orleans, who had watched, over 30 years, as bright children cycled through under-resourced schools and emerged without the tools they needed to reach the opportunities their intelligence deserved. She had started the foundation with a personal savings contribution of $40,000 and a borrowed office in the back of a church hall on Rampart Street. She had spent the first 5 years writing grants, cold-calling corporations, and driving a 2004 Honda Accord to speaking engagements where she sometimes made enough to cover the gas home. The foundation had grown, slowly, then significantly. By the time they launched the Build the Future campaign, they had served over 8,000 students across Louisiana and Texas, funded 300 college scholarships, and partnered with 12 universities on mentorship pipelines. But they had never had a permanent home. The learning happened in borrowed spaces, school cafeterias after hours, community center back rooms, library meeting spaces, and Dr. Thureau had spent years watching students arrive in places that felt temporary because they were, and knowing that the temporariness sent its own message about whose futures were worth a permanent investment. The capital campaign was her answer to that message. When Marcus had agreed to lead the campaign with his gift, Dr. Thureau had said 3 words to him on the phone: "Thank you, son." Then she had gone quiet for a moment, and then she had said, "My mother would have understood exactly what you're doing." Marcus had not said anything back for a few seconds. He had been thinking about Ida May, and the jar of hard candy on the windowsill, and the photograph of his grandfather on the mantelpiece. Tonight was the public launch of everything that Gift was going to build, which meant that tonight, inside the Hartwell Grand Hotel's Grand Ballroom, there were 412 guests who had paid between $500 and $5,000 per seat to be part of the announcement. There were journalists from 3 local outlets and 1 national publication. There were school board members, city council representatives, a state senator, and the deputy mayor of New Orleans. There were Crescent Foundation alumni, adults now, some of them with children of their own, who had flown in from Atlanta and Houston and Chicago to be in the room where the story they had been part of was being told publicly for the first time. And there was a display wall near the ballroom entrance, illuminated in soft gold light, with the names of the campaign's donors arranged in order of gift size. At the top, in larger letters than all the others, was the name Marcus Ellington Webb. Devlin Marsh had walked past that display wall 11 times that evening while greeting guests. He had not read it. The dinner service began at 8. Marcus was seated at the head table next to Dr. Tureau and Gerald Hughes and a woman named Simone Arsenault, who was the foundation's board chair and a retired federal judge. He ate. He talked. He was easy to talk to, unhurried, curious about the work the foundation had been doing in Baton Rouge, genuinely interested in a conversation Dr. Tureau was having about a new school partnership in the 7th Ward, 4 blocks from where his grandfather used to walk his mail route. Devlin Marsh was seated 2 tables away. He had been moved there by Gerald wordlessly, when the seating assignments were quietly revised after the foyer incident. He sat with the look of a man who was trying to decide whether the thing that had actually happened, or whether there was a version of events in which it hadn't been as bad as it was. There was not a version of events in which it hadn't been as bad as it was. The hotel's security director, a woman named Patricia, had been standing near the coat check when Devlin pointed at Marcus and told him to leave. She had her own small detail she was carrying through the evening. The hotel's lobby had a camera system that recorded continuously, and the foyer footage existed on a server in the hotel's security office. Patricia had not been asked to do anything with it. She was simply aware of it, the way professional people are aware of the tools of their trade. 3 of the guests who had been standing near the champagne table, a couple visiting from Houston, and a woman who was a freelance journalist, working on a piece about nonprofit funding in the Gulf South, had their phones in their hands when Devlin's voice had carried across the foyer. The journalist, whose name was Dana Okafor, had reflexively pressed record. She had not made a decision about it in that moment. She had simply responded to the instinct that people who report on things develop over years of reporting on things. Something was happening, and it should be documented. Dana had kept recording until Gerald Hughes introduced Marcus, and she had watched Devlin's face through her phone screen, and she had stopped recording when Marcus walked away. She had 12 seconds of clear audio and 8 seconds of usable video. She was a freelance journalist, but she had a newsletter with 40,000 subscribers and a relationship with 2 national outlets. She was thinking about what to do with what she had. The program began at 9. Dr. Tureau spoke first for 12 minutes about the work the foundation had done and the work it still needed to do. She spoke without notes. She talked about a girl named Yolanda from the 9th Ward who had come to a foundation workshop at 14, unable to identify a circuit board, and had graduated from Georgia Tech at 22 with an electrical engineering degree, and was now working on smart grid systems in New Orleans. She talked about a boy named Calvin from the 3rd Ward in Houston who had built his first working robotics project in a foundation-borrowed space workshop and who had 3 patents pending at the age of 19. She talked about Marcus. She did not say our lead donor. She said, a man who grew up understanding exactly what these children need, because he was one of them. And she turned and looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has fought a long fight and is allowing herself, just for a moment, to feel that it has been worth it. Marcus looked back at her. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the tablecloth. Then Gerald Hughes took the podium and announced the campaign total. The room learned that the Build the Future campaign had secured, in its quiet pre-launch phase, commitments totaling $31 million against a $25 million goal, and that the lead gift, $12 million, had come from Marcus Ellington Webb, a native son of the 9th Ward of New Orleans, founder and majority owner of WebTor's Infrastructure Solutions, who had, among other things, retrofitted the very school building where Yolanda had first learned to read a circuit board. The room stood up. All 412 people stood up at the same moment, and the sound of that was something that moved through the air physically, the way weather moves. Marcus stood at the podium. He did not speak for a moment. He looked out at the room. He looked at Dr. Tureau. He looked at the state senator, who was clapping. He looked at the Crescent Foundation alumni sitting in a block near the back, several of whom were not successfully containing their emotions. He looked at the display wall near the ballroom entrance, glowing gold, his grandfather's middle name part of his own name on a wall, in a hotel 4 blocks from the house on Desire Street where he had been born. He looked, briefly, at Devlin Marsh. Devlin was clapping. He was the last person in the room to stand. and his applause was the kind that hands produce when they are going through a motion that the rest of the body has not agreed to. Man, 400 people on their feet. And Devlin Marsh is sitting there being the last one to stand up clapping like he's trying to get a parking ticket. Dismissed. We need to talk about what happened after this speech, because this is where the evening really turned. Marcus spoke for 9 minutes. He did not tell a story designed to make people feel good. He told the truth, which sometimes made people feel good, and sometimes made them feel uncomfortable, and sometimes made them feel both at the same time. And that combination is generally more valuable than comfort alone. He talked about arriving at things. He talked about what it costs to arrive at something when the path to it was not built for you. He talked about the school in Baton Rouge, where he had poured concrete on weekends, and how, years later, his company had been awarded the contract to retrofit that school's electrical system, and how he had stood in that parking lot before the work began, and thought about the version of himself that had been 22 years old and exhausted and not sure the thing he was trying to build was possible. He talked about Ida May. He said she was alive. He said she was 87 and still received visitors in the front room of the house on Desire Street, which he had renovated 5 years ago. The roof sealed properly now. The window in the back bedroom weather-tight. The sewing room repainted the specific shade of yellow that she had always said she wanted, but had never had the money to buy the paint. He said that she had told him, when he described the capital campaign to her, that the thing she most wanted to see before she died was the doors open on the New Orleans Learning Center. He said he was going to make sure that happened. He paused. "I walked into this building tonight," he said, "and someone decided I didn't belong here. The room went still in a different way than it had gone still before. I'm not going to say who, and I'm not going to say more about it than that, because the point I want to make is not about him. The point is about what it means to decide who belongs somewhere before you know anything about them. It costs something, not just to the person you're looking at. It costs something to you. It narrows the world you're able to see. And in my experience, the people who most need to see a wider world are exactly the people most convinced that they're already seeing clearly." He looked at the room. "The children this foundation serves deserve spaces that tell them they belong before they've had to prove anything to anyone. That is what we are building. That is what these centers are for." He stepped back from the podium. The room stood up again. Devlin Marsh left the gala 20 minutes later. He did not stop to speak to Gerald Hughes. He did not speak to Priya, who was now positioned near the ballroom entrance, and would not have known what to say to him anyway. He collected his coat in silence and walked through the foyer where it had happened, past the display wall he had walked past 11 times without reading, and out into the warm October night. His phone was already ringing. His wife. He didn't answer. What Devlin did not know, as he stood on the sidewalk outside the Hartwell Grand, was that Dana Okafor had already sent 3 emails, one to her newsletter subscriber list, one to an editor at a national publication she had a relationship with, one to a contact at a local television news outlet who had been looking for a story connected to the gala. The subject line of all 3 was the same. Video. Gala host attempts to remove black donor from event he funded tonight. Hartwell Grand. She had attached the 12-second clip. She had also, in the body of each email, provided the context, the Crescent Foundation Gala, the $12 million lead gift, the display wall with Marcus Webb's name at the top, the identity of the man who had pointed across the Italian marble tile and said, "Remove him." By midnight, the clip had been viewed 40,000 times. By 6 o'clock the following morning, it had been viewed 400,000 times. By 9 o'clock that morning, 3 journalists had called the Hartwell Grand's communications director, who had not yet spoken to Devlin Marsh, who was not returning calls. Hold on, the man donated $12 million to build learning centers for kids in the neighborhood where he grew up, walked into the gala, and the event host tried to remove him before he even got his coat off, and it was all on video. And now the whole thing is out there. Let's talk about what happened next, because the aftermath of this story is where it really becomes something else entirely. The Hartwell Grand Hotel issued a statement at 11 o'clock the following morning. It read, in part, that the hotel was deeply troubled by the incident and had initiated an internal review of the conduct of all personnel involved in the event. It confirmed that Devlin Marsh held a voluntary board position with the hotel's hospitality committee, and that his involvement in that role had been suspended pending the outcome of the review. The statement did not use the word apology. Gerald Hughes issued a statement on behalf of the Crescent Foundation at the same time. His was shorter. It said that Marcus Webb had responded to the incident with characteristic grace, that his gift and his presence at the gala were both deeply honored by the Foundation, and that the Foundation's commitment to creating spaces where every person is welcomed without precondition was, if anything, more visibly necessary than ever. Marcus did not issue a statement. His company's communications director confirmed that he was aware of the coverage and was not planning to comment publicly at this time. The story ran in 3 local outlets, 2 regional outlets, and 1 national publication by the end of the first day. The national piece, which Dana Okafor co-authored with a staff reporter, included additional reporting. They had confirmed, through hotel staff familiar with the evening, that Devlin Marsh had walked past the donor display wall multiple times during the evening without stopping to read it. They had confirmed that Priya, the event coordinator, had attempted to intervene before Gerald Hughes arrived. They had confirmed that at least 3 guests in the foyer had witnessed the exchange. They had also, and this was the detail that traveled furthest, found 3 previous incidents involving Devlin Marsh at Hartwell Grand events. A complaint filed by a catering supervisor 3 years earlier. A note in the hotel's internal incident log about a similar interaction with a black attendee at a corporate conference 2 years ago, which had been marked resolved, no further action. A letter from a nonprofit director, written the previous year, and apparently never formally responded to, describing being questioned at the door of an event he had organized. The pattern was not invisible. It had simply never been assembled in one place before. The Hartwell Grand's full board met 4 days after the gala. Patricia, the security director, provided the full lobby footage from the evening. 22 minutes beginning when Marcus entered the building and ending when he walked into the ballroom with Gerald Hughes. The footage was clear. The footage was conclusive. The footage showed, among other things, Devlin Marsh walking past the illuminated donor wall at 7:43 p.m., 8:01 p.m., 8:17 p.m., and 8:34 p.m. before the incident at 8:41 p.m. Devlin Marsh resigned from the hospitality board by email, 4 hours before the board meeting. The email was 3 sentences long. It expressed regret for any discomfort caused, and stated his belief that the incident had been a misunderstanding arising from security concerns in a crowded event space. The board accepted his resignation. They also voted to engage an independent review of the hotel's event management practices and to require implicit bias training for all event-facing staff and volunteer board members going forward. They sent a formal written apology to Marcus Webb, signed by the full board, which acknowledged directly and without qualification that a guest had been treated with disrespect, based on assumptions that had no legitimate basis, that the hotel bore institutional responsibility for the environment that had made such assumptions possible, and that no words were adequate but they were offered nonetheless. Marcus received the letter at his office in Houston. He read it once. He folded it and put it in his desk drawer. He did not keep a lot of paper. He kept this. Devlin Marsh did not face criminal consequences. He had not committed a crime. What he had done specifically, was make a judgment in public, in front of witnesses, and the judgment had been wrong in a way that was connected to something much larger than his individual error, and the record of that moment now existed permanently in the form of 12 seconds of video and a growing archive of reporting that placed it in context. His professional consequences were less immediately dramatic than they might have been in a film, but they were real, and they accumulated. He was not renewed to 2 other civic boards he served on. A commercial real estate partnership he had been in negotiations to join went quiet after the coverage and never re-engaged. His name, when searched, returned the Gala story in the top results, and would continue to for the foreseeable future. He did not apologize publicly for 4 months. When he did, it was in an op-ed in a local publication, a piece that described what had happened as a moment in which he had acted on assumptions he should have examined, and which acknowledged that the pattern of previous incidents reflected a failure of character he was committed to addressing. The piece was written carefully. It did not minimize. It was the most honest thing he had likely written in years, and it came 4 months too late to feel like anything other than a reckoning he had been forced into, rather than chosen. Marcus Webb was not asked to respond to the apology. A journalist had reached out to his communications director. His communications director had replied with 2 words: no comment. The groundbreaking ceremony for the New Orleans Crescent Foundation Learning Center took place on a Saturday in April, 7 months after the gala, on a lot 3 blocks from the house on Desire Street where Marcus had been born. The lot had been cleared and graded and was ready for foundation work, which Marcus's company had donated at cost. There was a platform with folding chairs and a podium, and there were people standing on every side because the chairs had run out, and there were children from 3 local public schools in matching green t-shirts with the Crescent Foundation logo, and there were television cameras from 2 local stations and 1 national outlet. Dr. Lorraine Tureau spoke. She was, in her own words, choosing not to cry until after the shovels went in, and she made it until approximately the 3rd sentence of her remarks before that plan became aspirational rather than operational. Gerald Hughes spoke, the state senator spoke, the deputy mayor spoke. Marcus spoke last. He was brief. He said that this ground they were standing on was not neutral, that it had its own history, its own weight, its own understanding of what had been taken from it and what could still be built on it. He said, the children in the green t-shirts were the reason the building was going up, not him. He said he was looking forward to the day he could stand in a finished building on this spot and watch a 9-year-old figure out how a circuit works, because that was the thing. That was what all of it was for. He looked over at the edge of the crowd. In a folding chair at the end of the 2nd row, under a small canopy that Marcus's assistant had quietly arranged, sat Ida Mae Webb, 87 years old, her hair set and pinned, her hands folded in her lap over a small purse. Her eyes open and watching everything with the specific alertness of someone who has learned, over the course of a long life, that the good things are worth paying full attention to. She had not been to New Orleans in 4 years. Marcus had driven to pick her up at 4 in the morning, and she had been ready, sitting in the front room in her coat, the jar of hard candy still on the windowsill, the photograph of his grandfather still on the mantelpiece. When the shovels went into the ground, and the crowd made the sound that crowds make, at such moments, Marcus looked over at Ida Mae. She was pressing both hands against her chest. Her lips were moving, but she wasn't making sound. He knew what she was saying. He had heard her say it his whole life, whenever something was too big for words and too important for silence. She was saying, "Thank you, Lord." She was saying it for herself and for his grandfather and for his mother, who had died when Marcus was 34, and for the children in the green t-shirts, and for the building that was going to go up on this ground, and for the boy who had rewired her lamp when he was 9 years old, because he read a book about circuits, and thought maybe he could fix the thing that was broken. Marcus looked back at the ground. He was not going to cry at the groundbreaking. He had decided this firmly and in advance. He made it through the rest of the ceremony. He did not make it through the drive home. The New Orleans Crescent Foundation Learning Center opened 18 months after the groundbreaking. It was a 2-story building of yellow brick. Ida Mae had been consulted about the color, with fabrication labs on the 1st floor, seminar rooms and a library on the 2nd floor, and a courtyard between the wings with a garden that a local nonprofit maintained and that the students used for a community science project in its first year. On the wall of the main entrance hall, there was a plaque. It read, "This building was made possible by the generosity of Marcus Ellington Webb, who grew up 3 blocks from this site, and returned with more than he left with, because he never forgot where he came from or who helped him get there." Below his name, in smaller letters, was another name. In memory of Ellington James Webb, whose route through this neighborhood prepared the ground his grandson would build on. Ida Mae attended the ribbon cutting. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at the plaque for a long time. She did not say anything. She put one hand on the wall, flat, the way you put your hand on something when you want to feel that it is real. It was real. The scholarship fund that Marcus established in the first year of the Learning Center's operation provided full 4-year scholarships to 12. students annually from the Gulf South region, with preference for students from low-income households pursuing STEM degrees. It was funded with an additional $3 million drawn from the settlement of a civil complaint, not filed by Marcus, but filed independently by two of the guests who had witnessed the foyer incident and had, after the pattern reporting was published, contributed their own documented accounts of prior incidents involving Devlin Marsh at Hartwell Grand events. The settlement was reached quietly, without admission of liability, and the terms were not public. Marcus had not directed the money to the scholarship fund. The attorney who structured the settlement had suggested it. Marcus had said yes before she finished the sentence. The first class of WebTour's Legacy Scholars was announced in the spring, 12 students. 9 of them were the first in their families to attend a 4-year university. 3 of them were from the 9th Ward. One of them, a 17-year-old named Aisha from the Treme neighborhood, who had built her first working robotics project in the Crescent Foundation's borrowed community center space when she was 13, told a reporter from the Times-Picayune that she had visited the learning center before she knew about the scholarship, just to see what it looked like inside, and that she had stood in the entrance hall and read the plaque, and that she had thought, "That is a person who did not let anything stop him, and I am in the building he built on the ground where he grew up, and this door is not locked." All right. That girl went to that building and stood in the hall and read the plaque and thought, "This door is not locked." That is what this whole story was building toward. That is what a $12 million gift actually means when it's made by somebody who came from the place where it lands. That is what it looks like when something broken gets fixed properly, instead of just patched. Now I want to hear from you. Because this story is fiction, Marcus Webb is not a real person, and the Crescent Foundation Gala did not happen exactly this way. But the experience at the center of it is real. The experience of walking into a space where someone decides, in 3 seconds before you've said a word, that you don't belong there. That experience is not fictional. That experience is Tuesday for a lot of people watching this. So, here's what I want to know. Have you ever walked into a room where someone made you feel like you needed to prove you had a right to be there? And what did you do with that? Did you leave? Did you stay quiet? Did you prove it anyway and let the room catch up? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this story moved you, hit the like button. It helps more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you haven't, because we tell these stories every week, and we are not done. We are nowhere near done.